extraordinary thing happened.
I did not kill him.
Hey everyone, so it's that time of year again. If you're new to the page, every January or February, sometime around the new year, I like to count down and look back on my favorite films of the past year. I usually try to wait just a little bit longer just so that I know that I've seen pretty much everything that has a chance to make it onto my best films list. So today I'm going to be counting down my top 25 favorite films from 2023. And I have a couple honorable mentions to start off with. The first honorable mention is 65 by Scott Beck and Brian Woods. And it got a lot of unnecessary hate, I feel like, during its run. In a world ridden with franchise movies, spin-offs, reboots, the standalone American blockbuster is a dying breed. I feel like the movie knew exactly what it was and what it was going for. It's Adam Driver and dinosaurs, and for some reason people just didn't want to embrace that. If you haven't seen it, or if you decided not to watch it because of all the bad reviews, I would give it a shot. It's fun, it's kind of dumb, but it's a decent watch. My next honorable mention is also a sci-fi film that I feel didn't really live up to its potential, and this is The Creator by Gareth Edwards. It's definitely an interesting entry in Gareth Edwards' filmography. While it totally tracks with his entry of Godzilla and Rogue One in his body of work, it does feel like a step back in terms of storytelling craft and immersion. Still, it had some incredible VFX and use of scale, which has always been Gareth Edwards' main strength as a director. Still a really cool project, especially considering that they shot it on the Sony FX3. This film felt a little bit more like an experiment than it did a fully fleshed out narrative. And my third and final honorable mention for this list is Anatomy of a Fall, directed by Justine Triet. I might catch a little bit of flack for not putting this in my top 25 of the year. I do think it had some brilliant performances and was paced really well. I personally just don't love courtroom dramas very much and was kind of underwhelmed by the film as a whole, especially it being the Palme d'Or winner. I think this movie just subjectively was not my cup of tea, but I can see why it's gotten the acclaim that it has. Starting off the list at number 25, we have The Cow Who Sang a Song into the Future. I would give this film the award for weirdest movie of the year. It's kind of an environmental tale mixed with a sci-fi and a musical. It has some really stunning original songs that are all sung by the animals in the movie. It sounds really weird, and it is, but it's also very poetic and really unique. And as much as I didn't understand about the film, I did appreciate it for its artistic integrity, even though near the end I kind of stopped caring about the characters. I kept watching because it was just interesting to see where it would go. So if you haven't seen The Cow Who Sang a Song into the Future, it's definitely worth checking out. You might hate it or you might love it. Number 24 on the list is The Village by Michihito Fuji. This movie's only 2 hours, but it feels like a limited series in a way. It's a bit all over the place at times. But this film's standout quality is how it uses the location as one of the characters. The setting of this film, The Village, is, I would say, a bigger character than any of the people in the movie. This is the first, but definitely not the last film from Japan that you'll see on this list. This was a great year for Japanese cinema, but I would definitely say to check this one out if you like an atmospheric crime thriller. Number 23 is technically a short film by Wes Anderson called The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar. This is one of 3 or 4, I can't remember, short films that Wes Anderson put out in 2023. This was the only one that I liked. What often feels one note and rushed and somewhat unimportant comes full circle to be something worthwhile. Number 22 is another short film by Began. It's called A Short Story. I caught this on Mubi. It's only like 12 minutes, but it's a really kind of wholesome story about a black cat who is going on an existential adventure. It's beautifully shot with some of the coolest practical camera effects that I've seen recently. And even though it's only 12 minutes long, I felt like I had to include this film on the list. Number 21 on the list is Society of the Snow. All around great performances, great editing, great pacing, great writing. I didn't even know about this being a true event until I watched this movie. A little bit disturbing to watch, but by the end, it's really kind of emotional and a testament to the human spirit. Number 20 on the list is David Fincher's The Killer. I thought this was absolutely fine on first watch. It was only when I heard that this was potentially a metaphor by Fincher for his own career that I started to look at it more critically. We have this meticulous professional who's amazing at his job, and then he misses. He has a flub. To me, that's Mank, and if this theory is true, that's what Mank was to Fincher. So this film is kind of about this guy redeeming himself and redeeming his career. Really great fight choreography, and this is Fincher going back to his roots. I'm really excited to give it a second try. Number 19 is El Conde by Pablo Larraín, one of my favorite working directors. While I can't say I understood or enjoyed the film all the way through, and there were a lot of political complaints about the film that I just personally didn't get. The movie's shot beautifully. It's one of the best shot black and white movies of the past year. And I thought this one just being so ridiculous and obviously over the top was warranted. I don't know if I'm going to revisit it anytime soon, but just purely because I love Pablo Larraín's work so much. And because this film visually held so much weight this year, it got nominated for Best Cinematography at the Oscars, which I was not expecting. I felt like El Conde deserved a spot on this list. Number 18 is It Lives Inside by Bishal Dutta. It's his feature film debut, and I went into it really trying not to be biased because he's a good friend of mine, and I was so happy to say that the film is pretty incredible. It's everything that you want from a modern day coming of age horror film. It tackles certain tropes in ways that you'd expect and then subverts others in ways that you wouldn't. And it's just exciting to get a film from this perspective about the Indian American experience because it's not really something that we see all that often on the big screen. Number 17 is A Man by Kei Ishikawa. This film is about the investigation of a man and his life after he dies when it's found out that he was using a false identity. It's very similar to films that also tackle identity like Persona and was all around just a really compelling watch. Number 16 is one that I've been holding very close to my heart. I think it's my most liked Letterboxd review of the year, and that is Paw Patrol: The Mighty Movie. I took our 3-year-old boy to see this in theaters. This was his first time in a movie theater. This was his first cinematic experience, and it was everything I could have hoped for and more. I'm still reeling from how wildly important that event was for me and ended up being for him. I got emotional several times. There are some legitimately great frames in this movie, and the sound design in particular was actually fantastic.
It was so cool, and I loved it.
Number 15 is Scorsese's new film, Killers of the Flower Moon. I was really expecting this to be somewhere in the top 10. There was a lot of hype around it going into this. I thought the acting from Lily Gladstone and Leo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro, obviously the cast in a Scorsese movie is gonna knock it out of the park. The fact that Gladstone's been nominated and is the first Indigenous person to be nominated for leading actress is incredible. I'm incredibly excited to see where Scorsese's career goes from here. I know that he's gone on record and said that he only has a couple more films left in him. The film, to me, aside from the legacy that it represents for Native Americans in film, is Scorsese's career and his ability to create films of this caliber at his age. Number 14 is another animated film. It's Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. This film is a technical achievement in pretty much every regard. I think Into the Spider-Verse, the first film in this series, is a much better film. Across the Spider-Verse is the quintessential maximalist pop culture bomb that it sets out to be, but felt a little more emotionally detached than its predecessor. And I just have my fingers crossed that this team of animators and writers and creators is able to pull off one more amazing film for the third and upcoming installment in the series. Number 13 is a Vietnamese film called Inside the Yellow Cocoon Shell. This director, Pham Thien An, has really tapped into something profound. A lot of people who watch this are going to find it self-indulgent and boring and slow, and I would agree with all of those people. I think in a lot of ways this movie is a different kind of cinema than they're going to be used to. Clocking in at 3 hours long, any movie that hits that runtime needs to feel justified in its length. And I think with Inside the Yellow Cocoon Shell, it does. This film is a hypnotic, almost trance-like experience. A lot of it is shot in long takes that last, I thought, up to 10 minutes, maybe longer. You really do have to watch this film in one sitting, just block out a chunk of your day and get it done. This film also won the Camera d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, which is essentially their award for best cinematography. Number 12 on the list is The Beasts, directed by Rodrigo Sorogoyen. I didn't really know anything about the movie going into it or about the fact that this is based on a real event that happened. And if you haven't heard anything about the film either, I would keep it that way until after you've seen the movie. It's about a French couple who move to the Spanish countryside to start their dream project, but end up clashing with some of the villagers. It's a pretty shocking and emotionally investing drama, and I would highly recommend checking it out. Number 11 is Barbie. In the history of Hollywood, 28 people, all men, have had the sole directing credit on $1 billion movie. With Barbie, Greta Gerwig joins that list. This is one of the best ensemble casts in recent memory. All of the performances are pitch perfect. I feel like one of the elements of the film that doesn't get enough praise is the cinematography. The film was shot by Rodrigo Prieto, who also shot Killers of the Flower Moon. He's been Scorsese's go-to cinematographer. He's shot films like Silence and Beautiful. And I think his cinematography here is often invisible in this film. Playfully genuine is the best way I can describe it. The openness this movie has and willingness to hurt some feelings to protect others is really special and really unique. Barbie really left an impression on me that I wasn't expecting it to. Okay, kicking off the top 10, we have Talk to Me by Danny and Michael Philippou. I grew up watching Raka Raka. If you don't know, these twins from Australia came up on YouTube and got famous for making really violent comedy and action sketches. Going into their debut feature film, I had no idea what to think, but I was really surprised by the authenticity in the storytelling and their intensity of the craft. Because of the Philippou twins' age, come up, and style, this to me felt like the first great horror film by young millennial directors. They're only 30 years old, and I felt the modern fear of peer pressure and drug addiction, which could have been very cheesy and overplayed, was done very honestly and brutally and very well. They've already gotten greenlit for a sequel, and based on the amount of lore and detail put into the story, I have no doubt that they have plenty of material to draw from for the next film. At number 9, we have The Zone of Interest, directed by Jonathan Glazer. Walking out of the screening, I was a little bit torn on how to react to this film. If you haven't seen it, it's pretty experimental and shot very differently than any other film about this subject matter that I've ever seen. It's more of a cautionary tale that asks more questions than it does say anything directly. There's a discourse about Holocaust movies. Why do we make them? Should we make them? What do or can we learn from them? This film succeeds in portraying evil in a new light and in turning the mirror towards ourselves. I particularly really loved the visual language of this film. It's very flat, static, and digital, which is not something that you'd expect to see for a period piece. I think way too often films about atrocities use such beautiful cinematography, which sometimes ends up making the picture more about the art than about the reasons behind the picture. I really appreciated the way this film looked so normal. It removes the distance from then to now. It's not really a film I can see myself rewatching, but might be forced to replay some of the scenes in my head for a very long time. Number 8 is Fallen Leaves, directed by Aki Kaurismäki. This is the first film that I've seen from him, and I thought it was wonderful. It's a beautifully shot and subtly performed romantic comedy about trying to get by in a world full of dark. This movie was such a breath of fresh air to me. Awkward, charming, funny, and expertly crafted. Fallen Leaves is a must-see from 2023, and it's going to be something that I'll be revisiting down the line as somewhat of a comfort film. Number 7 is The Holdovers, directed by Alexander Payne. This movie feels like a lost gem from the 70s. I was absolutely mind-blown to find out that this wasn't shot on film. Overall, this was just a really memorable, feel-good, wholesome movie that I can see going down in history as a holiday classic and staple. Number 6 is Rice Boy Sleeps by Anthony Shim. Rice Boy Sleeps was a really intimate and genuine indie drama. Growing up in the United States and being the only Asian kid in my class in elementary school, the first chapter of this film was especially important to me. I think the film falters a little bit as we enter the boys' teenage years. The film is beautifully shot on analog film, and I'm really looking forward to watching it again. Starting off my top 5 films of 2023 is The Boy and the Heron, directed by the greatest living filmmaker, Hayao Miyazaki. This was an overwhelming experience. I had the opportunity to see it a little bit early, and I'm still processing what the film is and means both to Miyazaki and to myself. In my opinion, no other career or body of work has cemented itself as individual statements and as a collective like Miyazaki's has. It's hard to believe that it's been a decade since his last film, The Wind Rises, and it's even harder to believe that this is his final film. The film ventures through time, purgatory, and tackles themes like overcoming grief. It also contains some of the most incredible imagery, not only in a Miyazaki film, but in any film, period. The opening scene in particular had the hair on the back of my neck standing up. The sound design in this movie is so immersive and powerful. There are literally moments where the sound mix itself gave me chills. And finally, the score by my favorite composer, Joe Hisaishi, is one of his very best. There were a couple moments where I wished that the score was given the chance to go even grander to really meet the visuals. I am really curious to see how this film evolves on my second watch. It did feel longer than its runtime, and the pacing was sometimes a little disjointed for me, but I tend to feel this with Miyazaki's films since his work so closely resembles dreams and nightmares more than other movies or literature. They don't really feel confined to any structure, and the dream logic is real within the walls of this film, which is what makes it such a fun ride. Number 4 was my most anticipated movie of the year, and that is Monster by Hirokazu Koreeda. This was Koreeda's first film in the Japanese language since 2018 with his Palme d'Or winning film Shoplifters. And while I loved Broker and haven't seen The Truth, I was absolutely ecstatic to hear that Koreeda was returning to direct in Japanese. It's not hard to see why this won Best Screenplay at Cannes. It has a repetitive structure told from different perspectives, kind of a la Rashomon, but never really loses momentum or feels old. A huge testament to Koreeda's storytelling and the editor working in perfect harmony with Yuji Sakamoto's script. My only regret about the film is that by the end, some of the most central characters' arcs don't feel fully realized or resolved. It's a piece on cancel culture, abuse, and community scapegoating, which reminded me a little bit of The Hunt, and turns into something a bit warmer by the end, but didn't quite reach the emotional heights that other Koreeda films have in the past, like Shoplifters, Like Father Like Son, or even Our Little Sister. The cinematography is especially noteworthy. Some long takes, beautiful camera work, and stunning compositions make this feel like one of his most technically polished pieces. The color grade too was unlike anything I've seen, where the whites and tans and yellows are muted into this lovely cream color, and the blues in the sky, shadows, and ocean are rendered so gently. I could watch this again simply to admire the color work. The one time I did almost cry was in the last act when it hit me that the gorgeous, minimalist music I was listening to was the final notes Ryuichi Sakamoto ever composed. Number 3 is Perfect Days, directed by Wim Wenders, starring my favorite working actor, Koji Yakusho. This film is a stunning portrait of a man, his way of life, balancing work with leisure, appreciating light and shadow and loneliness. Perfect Days is so uninterested in adhering to genre or other film constructs, or pleasing an audience who might crave something quicker, easier to grasp, or more outrightly funny, sad, or dramatic. It just is. Screenwriting 101 tells you, don't have your first scene be your protagonist waking up in the morning, and Wenders said, "Fuck it, I'll do that 12 times. This very well might be a 10 on my second watch now that I know where it's going, what I should be looking for, to experience, to learn, and to feel. And now we get to Koji Yakusho's masterful performance. He won Cannes' Best Actor Award. Yakusho displays so many complex emotions, some of which I don't even know how to describe with just his eyes. It's insane. The final few moments of this film are some of the most stunning in recent cinema. This movie, above all else, reminds me to take a step back, take a breath in, and appreciate the fact that you're fucking alive. The main character, Hirayama, shows us that we don't need money or material things to find happiness. All it takes is patience, time, and an honest relationship with yourself. My second favorite film from 2023 was a bit of a sleeper film. I was excited to see it, but I had no expectation that it would be this high on my 2023 list, let alone in my top 100 of all time, and that is Ryusuke Hamaguchi's Evil Does Not Exist. I was sitting comfortably at an 8 out of 10 for this film until the last 15 minutes. What begins as a slow, poetic drama about urbanization transforms into a new kind of beast by the final act. It had me completely enthralled, bewildered, and when the credits rolled, holding my breath in disbelief. The title begs just as many questions as the movie itself, and while I fundamentally disagree, evil does certainly exist in this world. The idea the film presents really hit home. It subverts expectations quite well, like how life does. Everyone is just doing their job. It's not so simple as good versus bad. And Hamaguchi acknowledged this in a Q&A after the film. Evil does exist, and that the film, being contradictory to its own title, is part of what paints this portrait so masterfully. My only gripe with this film, and he does this in Drive My Car too, is the very noticeable camera shake in certain moments. I suppose Yusuke is more concerned with character and story to care to fix these little bumps, or maybe he likes the realism and documentary style that it brings at times. It just takes me out of his films every time there's a driving shot and the camera is shaky, because the opening shot of this film is a very smooth, perfectly composed tracking shot through trees. So it just makes me wonder why he chooses not to eliminate things that could potentially be distracting to the viewer. In the end, though, it's a microscopic detail in a vast and haunting picture that I'll often be thinking about. Like I mentioned, this film has snuck its way into my top 100 films of all time. It's an ode to fatherhood and protecting one's home, and I absolutely cannot wait to revisit this. And finally, my favorite film of 2023 should come as no surprise if you follow me on anything, is Godzilla -1 by Takashi Yamazaki. Rarely do I ever give a perfect score on first watch, but there is no other way for me to adequately describe my feelings for this film. I grew up with Godzilla. The original 1954 film was the first movie I ever remember watching. Not only is Godzilla Minus One a return to form for Toho's reign, it might genuinely be the greatest film in the entire franchise. In parallel with the main character's PTSD, survivor guilt complex, and compounded trauma, Godzilla's rage in Minus One became an analogy for Japan's post-war frustration, shame, and grief for the innocent lives lost. There's a sequence in the second act of Minus One where a very clear visual metaphor is realized, and I wept. I bawled my eyes out. Naoki Sato created the greatest musical score of the year, in my opinion. It really reminded me of Yuichi Sakamoto's work. Slow swelling strings evolve into otherworldly choral elegies. The cinematography and visual effects marry perfectly. This is by far the best shot Godzilla film out there. It's absolutely stunning and only done on a $15 million budget. I loved this film so much since stepping out of the theater, and if you look on my Letterboxd top 4 currently, you'll see that Godzilla Minus One has officially made its appearance. Yamazaki has already said that he's very interested in doing a sequel for this film. Please let that happen. I'd never heard of this director before, but after seeing his singular vision for this film, I would trust nobody else, except for myself, to direct the future of the Godzilla franchise. So that's my top 25 favorite films of 2023. The year started off a bit slow, but gradually turned into something really special and memorable. I think it was a pretty great year for movies, and I'm excited to hear what you think. What were your favorite films of last year? Leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.